Welcome to AI Decoded, that time of the week when we look in depth at some of the most eye-catching stories in the world of artificial intelligence. Here's what's up for you this week, and we begin with the Mirror newspaper. The pop megastar Taylor Swift has become the latest victim of AI misuse after extremely graphic and suggestive images created by AI circulated on social media. Meanwhile, the US president also fell foul of AI fakery after people received pre-recorded phone calls using artificial intelligence to mimic Joe Biden's voice. According to The Guardian, the message urged New Hampshire residents not to vote in last Tuesday's primary. The Telegraph carries a warning from UK spy chiefs that artificial intelligence tools are making email scams more convincing than ever before. New Delhi Television Online has this remarkable story about how police turned to artificial intelligence to unravel a Delhi murder mystery. They used AI not only to identify the victim, but then used it again to lead them to arrest the people accused of the murder. And finally, PC Gamer reports on comments made by Bill Gates earlier this week when he was asked about the threat of artificial intelligence. The Microsoft co-founder said, well, the key thing is that the good guys have better AI than the bad guys. So with me now, our weekly AI guru, Priya Lakhani. He's chief executive of Sensity AI. It's an artificial intelligence education company that develops AI-powered learning tools. Nice to see you.
Love it to see you.
Loads just to get through here.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a theme though, isn't there? There's not much good news in the pile of stories today.
No, but it covers the full spectrum, which is why I think it's so interesting. I think today we're going to see a little bit of the good, but a lot of the bad and the ugly.
And it might get us into that conversation of not so much regulation, but how authorities might think of kind of clamping down on some of the darker side of AI.
Absolutely. I mean, that's definitely the question that everyone's been asking and was the focus of the UK AI Safety Summit late last year. And I think what you're going to see from today, and I think this is really important, Ben, and I think people can ask for this, is look, it's a race actually against the bad actors, right? And so it's not about just sitting there and pondering and pontificating. This is about acting. Because today we're just going to see a multitude of stories where things have gone wrong. There is a really positive one with, in terms of forensics, which we will get onto though.
Yes,
I promise you that.
Some good news.
Yes, there's a little bit, there's a glimmer.
So let's start with the Mirror. This is Taylor Swift, and people looking at social media today may have seen some pretty distressing, pretty horrible images. They were fake images, they're deep fake images created by AI. Just explain what they were.
Yeah, so what one can do with generative AI, so it's AI that can generate text, media, images, is bad actors can create pornographic content. This is a really, really horrific story. So I woke up to it this morning, lots of people did, where Taylor Swift is viral on X, and someone's created some, I'm not going to even begin to describe them, but some horrendous, horrific images of her related to the person that she's dating at the moment and his football team. They originated today. One was nearly live, one post for around 17 hours. Taylor Swift AI was trending on X with more than 58,000 posts in the morning. One post gained more than 45 million views before it was eventually removed. 24,000 reposts, hundreds of thousands of likes and bookmarks. So even people liking and bookmarking, honestly, shame on you. Look, the problem is the real problem is when you're thinking about deepfakes and pornographic images, right? 96% of deepfakes are pornographic, and 99% of the 96% target women, right? And so this is a significant problem. And actually, it's another type of technology that creates some of this problem. So when these things are on social media and they go viral, people hide behind anonymity. So even there, when you wanted to talk about regulation, you want to talk about laws, can Taylor Swift go to harassment laws, privacy laws, defamation, copyright, intellectual property not yet been used, data protection. And then you've got, in New York and New Jersey, representatives in the US saying they want to reintroduce a bill that they introduced last year and get that passed, which makes it a federal crime to create and manipulate images for pornographic purposes. You've got the Online Safety Act in the UK that introduces, I think, Section 66. It amends the Sexual Offences Act where this is illegal. You can point to all of those things, but when you haven't got the perpetrator in your hands, actually, that creates a huge problem. And then are those laws potentially, I mean, they're not meaningless, right? Because they are deterrents, obviously, and they will work in many cases. But Anonymity here, for me, is a significant issue because you can hide behind these anonymous handles and then you can hide behind, lots of IP addresses.
Yeah.
And the FBI, for example, that have been looking into deepfakes for some time, they struggle to find these people.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. There are two real issues here, aren't there? One is who is creating these things and able to create.
Yeah.
And then there's the other about how they are shared.
Yeah.
And like you said, you might close down one Twitter account, you
Yeah.
might limit access to certain websites, but then it pops up somewhere else. And once it's out there, it's out there.
Yeah, and then the issue with even closing down the site. So X is already in pretty hot water with the European Commission. So they have formally started proceedings looking at, it's a formal review essentially of how X dealt with misinformation, disseminating fake news and misinformation last year when it came to the Middle East and the war, right? And they're in hot water over that already. And actually what people are looking at is that when Elon Musk became CEO, they reduced the content moderation team. So how are they even dealing with these issues and this is the problem, like how are you actually going to solve these problems? So those issues, and I must say my daughter, the reason I was late even coming in today was she sent me here with Swiftie bracelets in solidarity with Taylor Swift. Mummy, please wear this and shake them on the BBC. But people are genuinely horrified. I mean, one other way is to act with your feet, and I'll tell you how.
Yeah.
If there's one star, Time Person of the Year, who has an enormous following that's global, it's Taylor Swift. And I was thinking about this today. It's what I would like to call the Swiftie strike.
Go on.
So they could organise that if they're not happy with the way in which platforms are dealing with this, big tech are dealing with this, log off for a week.
Yeah.
Log off for 2 weeks. What's the consequence? Well, advertisers won't be happy.
Yeah.
Right? That will, if you want to get a tech CEO or any CEO's attention, affect their bottom line,
Yeah.
right? Don't wait for regulation. And then also there's a long-term effect. If you switch off for a week, you go somewhere else, don't you? Right? And then you might
Strike
look.
up new habits.
Yeah, exactly, and it creates that effect. So anyway, that's just an idea of mine. But
And she's very good at kind of mobilising her fan base, isn't she?
Absolutely.
Such a huge fan base. Let's turn to something else that's really interesting. It's sort of in a similar vein, isn't it? This is President Joe Biden, and people may have got a phone call thinking it was a pre-recorded message from President Biden advising them not to vote. Just explain why this is a problem.
So this is a problem because it's fake,
Yep.
right? So it's a robocall, it's someone using AI to fake his voice. It did affect voters. So voters, they actually included the phone number of a candidate in that particular area, right? So because they included a phone number, she got phone calls from people saying, oh, I'm not supposed to vote. I got a call from Joe Biden, right? And so if people are even thinking that, actually, then that's affecting voters and their actions. So the problem with this is when it affects elections, right, it threatens democracy.
Yep.
That's the problem, right? Democracy relies on truth, right? We want to know what we're seeing. We want to know what we're hearing.
And especially in a year like this, what is the number? 2 billion people are going to vote this year. 50 most populous nations on earth will go to the polls.
Exactly. It affects the global population because of the amount of elections this year. But the problem we all have with this, people talking about, we've been talking about this for years, and people say, oh, deepfakes are overblown. They're overblown. No, actually, what happened was the people talking about them were talking about them early enough for you to get your act together to do something about it. So even the FEC, so that's Federal Election Commission, have been put under massive pressure to actually make a decision about AI. And I'll tell you why. Their authority is limited, okay? So what they decide doesn't actually affect, Joe Bloggs, right? It affects political campaigns. And when you've got people like Ron DeSantis, who used a deep fake against Trump, right, President Trump, former President Trump, then actually you've got a really bad example being set by potential leaders, right? And then you've got the FEC being incredibly slow. Yeah. And then while states have made their own rules and platforms are making their own rules...
It needs to be cross-border.
The problem
by its very nature, it is cross-border.
Exactly. The first two stories, if they tell them anything, is get your skates on.
Yeah.
If the EU can create their AI Act and pass it in the limited time they actually did, making an amendment for large language models and generative AI, they can do this.
Yeah, that's the thing. Regulators too slow. All the while, the impact is being felt around the world, isn't it? So scams, another thing that we will all feel. Scams getting more and more clever and a lot easier to create using AI. Because, and this is the issue, isn't it? They become more convincing because it's hard to tell what's human and what's AI?
Yeah, so this is a really great report, and actually it's really easy reading if anyone wants to look at it. It's from the National Cybersecurity Centre. They released a report this week. They actually said it's really essential to focus not only on the risks posed by AI, but also the opportunities when it comes to cybercrime. Okay, so when it comes to what you were talking about there, so luring customers, luring people to clicking on a link and sharing their details. So phishing attacks, ransomware. So
holding something on your computer.
Absolutely. So what they're saying in the report is actually they believe it's highly likely, and they have the spectrum of what likelihoods look like, and actually it's like 95% likely that those novice hackers, not very sophisticated hackers, will be increasing their activity because they can now use AI to help them.
Right.
So and the point is just trust no one. If you get a link, right, if you see something that looks really, really similar, and the thing is they can now make the language more similar. You used to be able to spot an issue with the spelling.
Yeah.
They can
dodgy
correct
spelling, dodgy punctuation,
and
all that
then
sort of
they
stuff.
go on in the reports to talk about advanced attacks. Advanced attacks, for example, looking at weaknesses and vulnerabilities in people's networks and all sorts of areas that will cause mass chaos. There's about 11 trillion reasons for us to work in this area, because by 2025 they expect it will cost us $10.6 trillion.
So there's a reason to act.
There's a really good reason to act. And the fact is that supply chains, so Gartner did a report and they said over the next 2 years, 45% of global organisations, so this is for all the CEOs listening to this, will be impacted in some way by a supply chain attack. So if you've not got someone consciously looking at security and actively looking at that, or working with some of the best companies in the world, Darktrace is one of them from the UK, then that's something that should be on your to-do list this week.
Now, speaking of other good uses of AI, this one is fascinating. This is from NDTV. A man who was murdered in Delhi, and the police were struggling to identify him. They used AI to do it. How?
Yeah, so you reconstruct the face using artificial intelligence. So the issue here is from the picture you can see from the image, right? Here's on the left-hand side. I think it's on the left-hand side. But obviously, if you find an unidentified body, right, eyes are closed, potentially actually, in other cases, there could be a lot of sort of, disfigurement, exactly. And so they reconstructed the face. They used a colouring technique to basically make the lips less blue. They opened his eyes. They also enhanced it to make the eyes more lifelike. And then they essentially printed that and put it all over the place. They spread it with all their networks. And the brother of the deceased identified the poster as his brother. And then they used surveillance techniques, so mobile phone surveillance, for example, to figure out, and CCTV and footage to figure out exactly what happened. And they've actually made a few arrests. So
incredible, isn't it? And it's really reassuring to see AI being used for good. We've not got much time. I want to talk about Bill Gates, because this is all about, you can't stop people using AI, but the idea that if the good guys are one step ahead of the bad guys, that's not a bad place to be.
It's not a bad place to be, but then, with, for example, the stories from, about cybercrime, you've got this kind of arms race, right, between cybersecurity professionals and cyber criminals and who's going to be one step ahead. But yes, you've got advances in education, in healthcare. In this story we had in Delhi there, you've got this kind of ever-evolving landscape of AI and technologies being used to help with, arrests and identifying various perpetrators, etc. So there is a lot of good there, and we've talked about that a lot in previous episodes of this part of the programme. But the point is that Bill Gates is sort of, yes, there's good, yes, there's bad, let there be more good and less bad. It's pretty obvious. It's just there's a lot of work to be done, particularly by policymakers.
Priya, so good to have you with us, talking us through those stories this week. Priya Lakhani there, Chief Executive of Sentry Tech. Thank you.